Okay.
So, hi Ian, how are you?
Good, Michelle.
Good. So I wanted to ask you a question about when did you realize that you had a passion for crystals?
Well, it started when I was really young, only because I had a passion for rocks. I mean, I loved rocks. Any kind of rock, fossils. I was always collecting, and I was limited to the type of crystals and things or rocks I could get. I lived in Ohio, and there was a lot of stones that came down through the glaciers. There were glacier stones that you'd find in the field that were unique from the other rocks that were around. So I always collected those, and I go on the railroad tracks. At that time, you could live in. We lived in a rural area, and in our school, at recess, I'd be on the railroad tracks collecting fossils from what they used as a bed for the tracks, from the limestone. And there's all kinds of fossils in it. I even had my friends out there looking for fossils for me, and different things. So I always had a fascination for it. But then I started reading about it and getting more into geology and understanding geology, and my first experience with dealing with stones was just that they were beautiful, right? So my first love was I got myself a tumbler, and I got some agates from out west, and these were incredible. It's so incredible to have these stones I'd never had before, and tumbled them and made them beautiful. And then I started understanding and appreciate their beauty, and then I taught myself how to cut stones, make cabochons out of stones. But at that time I didn't have the metaphysical connection to it. It was more just the fascination. And anytime I would go on vacation or anything, I'd look for a rock shop and buy as many rocks or crystals that I could find, just for their beauty and appreciating them. When I started to learn and understand crystals, I was still collecting them, but by that time I'd moved from my rural hometown in Ohio, and I moved to California. And once I moved to California, I started getting into meditation and understanding the world in a totally different way. I was in yoga, and I lived up in the mountains by myself for over a year and a half, and I learned all these different ways of looking at the world through meditation and following different teachers and gurus and things like that. And I also was doing massage. I was a massage therapist, and part of my journey was working with doing past life work that I did, delinking I call it, and things that I was taught through a psychic at that time who adapted me as his apprentice. Anyway, I always had crystals around, and the crystals are always with me. And then I realized that the crystals were more than just beautiful. They really had a quality. When I was doing the work with the clients, I started hearing voices, and these voices were like coming from the crystals. It's like the crystals were talking to me. And I remember that I just gone to a rock shop in Mountain View, California, and they had just brought some crystals that were dug up in, I think it was Utah, and they weren't clean or anything. They needed to be cleaned. And I was in the process of cleaning the crystals, and I was at that time I was a musician. I was playing I was a belly dancing drummer, actually. Played professional Middle Eastern music, and we were at a performance, and the crystals were at my friend's house where I'd started cleaning them, and I had them in a jar with sulfuric acid, salicylic acid, and it was cleaning off the clay and cleaning the crystals. And I'm about 5-6 miles away from his home, and I started getting this high-pitched tone, this frequency was coming from the crystals, and I could hear the crystals, and it was like really weird. I'm listening to these crystals and they're miles away, but I'm getting this message. But the message was in tone. It was a frequency. It was like they were singing, right? And I knew, okay, there's something with crystals. There's something I need to know about crystals. So when I'm at that time, then I started understanding more about the past lives and understanding ourselves as a consciousness through my own experience, because doing past life regression work and helping people go back through their lives, reliving those lives, and rewinding the experiences. Usually the experience was connected to a trauma. Something had happened in the past that created a trauma or a disturbance in their world. And I would need information, and with the crystals around, I would get more information. More information would come in, and it would enhance the experience. I was also at that time, I'd gone to a local crystal or a rock shop in San Francisco, and they had quartz crystal hearts that were faceted, and I gave all my clients, when I worked with them, I'd give them the crystal heart, because they would have that heart, and it would amplify their emotions, it'd amplify their feelings. They'd bring it to me when they do a session, and it's stored. Knowing that crystals were senders, receivers, and recorders that I'd learned by then, they'd store that information. I also, doing the past life work, I was going back further and further and further in my own consciousness and understanding our evolution and where we came from. As consciousness, we came from a point of light that, out of the desire to know more and why about itself in physical form, we became subatomic particles, atomic compounds, crystallization, or the crystal kingdom, and then evolved from those other kingdoms. And this became my experience through working with the crystals. I was able to go back into the crystal kingdom and feel the crystal kingdom and understand that that's where my consciousness had been at one time as an individual, where we all have actually evolved from as consciousnesses. So the crystals just started talking to me. I would work with them and I would get information, and the information would come to me. I also had an advisor. I do channeling, and I had advisors, inner advisors, that would validate the work with the crystals. And certain crystals would tell me if they were a fire crystal or an earth crystal or a water crystal or air crystal. And knowing that when I was working with the crystals, and I was working with the clients, I would use certain crystals and certain agates and things that I had, and do them on the client as I was working with them to bring out the experiences and to help healing, that type of thing. But it was more of just my involvement with the crystals and how I interacted with them and how they taught me. And applying what I learned from them, rather than reading and learning about them in books, they were being taught to me as I played with them and worked with them. And as I'm working with them, I was finding out that by listening to my inner advisors and following the guidance and applying it, that the results would occur. You know, knowing that certain crystals and certain colors and certain minerals and certain things that had a certain effect on people became my experience. And then when I joined with Jane Ann Dow is sort of the grandmother of crystal healing. She had done a lot of her, all of her studies and her discovery or her journey, which she actually calls a crystal journey, through doing meditations and channeling. You know, allowing the information to come through her and actually documenting it and writing in a book. And when I connected with Jane Ann, my experience matched what she was sharing and teaching. So my my fascination with them and my desire to be around them, plus the work that I'd done with Lazarus and Lazarus's information and what they do and teach about crystals, of how to interact with crystals, how to awaken them, how to ask permission with a crystal, because crystals are consciousness. They're basically frozen consciousness in crystalline form. And in the crystal kingdom, these consciousnesses travel through those kingdoms, travel through the crystal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom. And we've evolved from those stages of evolution in physical form. So some of us have more of affinity for the crystal kingdom because as a consciousness ourselves, we spend more time there, more or less. We have more of affinity for it. And you'll see people who have more affinity for the plant kingdom because that was where they, as a consciousness, spent more time or more of their evolutionary process in that kingdom. But everything else has come through experience and working with the crystals, working with people with the crystals, and I hope that wasn't too long.
That's good.